Chapter 8. Darkness still filled the room when Shelby's alarm went off, but it took her only moments to shake the sleep from her eyes. She had to check the snow. Pushing the plush comforter back, she swung her legs out and into her fluffy leopard print house shoes that she always kept by the side of her bed. Even though her room was carpeted, it was always cold in the morning. The poor old heater just couldn't seem to keep up with the draft that drifted in through the old windows. A few steps brought her to the window, and she pulled back the curtains. The streetlight gave just enough illumination to see that snow still fell softly to the completely white ground. She let the curtain fall back over the window and padded back to her nightstand where the remote sat. She punched the button and the old television hummed to life. It was a flat screen, but not the fancy ones that were so popular today. She had no Apple TV, no Roku device, and definitely no 3D. No, this was a television she had purchased used when her last television had given up the ghost. The screen flickered for a moment before coming into focus, and Shelby curled her feet up under her to watch the news report. While we expected snow, we did not predict it would happen this quickly, or that we would get this much, the woman on the screen said. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves to her thin shoulders. And though Shelby had often heard that TV cameras made people look 10 pounds heavier, this woman didn't appear to have any extra weight on her. Her hand motioned to the screen behind her, and Shelby marveled at how good she was at making it appear she could see the image on the screen, when Shelby knew a green screen was the only thing behind the woman. It was fascinating technology. The streets are still slick, and the DOT is recommending that you give yourself an extra half hour of driving time to navigate the icy roads. The good news, for those of us who have to commute to work, is that the sun is expected to come out today, and temperatures are expected to rise to the mid-40s, melting all the snow by late afternoon. Yes! Shelby jumped up from the bed and danced an awkward jig over to the closet. She might not have rhythm, but what she lacked in style she made up for in exuberance, and she knew just who to thank this morning. The snow would be gone by tomorrow, which meant the clinic could continue as planned. She jumped in the shower, whistling as she washed. Maybe they could even take the kids out back to play in the snow if they all brought warm enough coats. She knew they would go stir-crazy if they were stuck in the center, while the snow taunted them from the ground. Her joy lasted through breakfast, through brushing her teeth and bundling up for the cold. It even lasted through the slightly terrifying drive where she almost swerved off the road when she was forced to brake at the bottom of a slight hill. But it died as she pulled into the parking lot of the community center. She had no idea why, but an ominous feeling that something was wrong fell on her shoulders as she parked the car and got out. Nothing looked out of place. Snow covered the roof, but thankfully it still appeared to be in one piece. The windows weren't cracked or broken, so what was it? With careful, deliberate steps, Shelby made her way up the sidewalk. She'd have to get some salt on it quickly before anyone slipped and fell. Hopefully they had some in the supply shed. The supply shed? Had something happened to it? Was that why she felt something was wrong? She quickly veered to the right and toward the shed, but when she rounded the corner, she stopped. The shed looked fine, and the lock still hung securely on the door, so that wasn't it either. Shaking her head, she returned to the center and unlocked the front door. The lights flicked on like normal, so it wasn't the loss of electricity that bothered her. Had she left the computer on? The deposit out? She didn't think so. Closing was habit for her, and she did it the same way every night. Shelby opened the reception area door, but there was no light coming from the computer, and no deposit bag on the table. She must be going crazy. It was probably just the fear of not getting the money needed that had her freaking out. Opening the desk drawer, she placed her purse inside and then took off her coat. The chill set in immediately. She needed to get the heater turned on so the kids wouldn't freeze when they got here, and then maybe fix herself some hot tea. The thermometer was located on the way to the kitchen, and she clicked it on and cranked the dial up a few notches for good measure. Then she turned on the kitchen light and grabbed the kettle from the stove. It still had a little water in it, but figuring she might need more, she took off the lid and placed it under the faucet. She turned the handle, but no water came out of the faucet. Shelby tapped on the handle. Was there a clog somewhere? Had the landlord forgotten to pay the water bill? No, she would have gotten a notice if that was the case, wouldn't she? "Shelby, are you here?" Tucker's voice carried through the quiet building. "In the kitchen," she called back. "Everything okay?" he asked as he stepped through the door frame. "Not really. We don't seem to have water." She turned the faucet again to show him, and a frown creased his features. "Do you know where the water shutoff valve is?" Shelby blinked at him. Water shutoff valve? What was he talking about? She didn't have any water, so why would she need to shut it off? "I don't know. Why?" "I think your pipes might be frozen, and if we don't get the water shut off before they start thawing, they could burst." Shelby's eyes widened. Was this what her ominous feeling had been about? That would be bad, right? That would be very bad. Burst pipes usually cause flooding, which could shut the center down for weeks. No! No, no, no! She shook her head as she began pacing the floor. We can't shut down for weeks. If we shut down, we'll lose the last few clients we have, and then I'll have no way to pay the rent. Shelby was babbling, but she couldn't stop. This was her nightmare come true, and she thought they were finally going to be able to save the center. "Shelby." Tucker grabbed her arms and stilled her pacing. "We can fix this, but I need to shut off the water. Is there a basement area?" Basement. She tried to make her brain work, but not only was it still focused on the problem, it was also now reacting to Tucker's touch. Heat from his hands pulsated through her arms, and she felt mesmerized by his stare. Basement? This time she managed to say the word out loud. "Yes, I think there is." "Okay, can you show me?" Shelby nodded, blinked, and forced her mind to concentrate. Yes, of course." She led the way out of the kitchen and down the narrow hallway that led to the basement area. "Wait here. I'll be right back." As Tucker disappeared through the doorway, Shelby knotted her hands together and closed her eyes. She needed the peace that praying brought. Tucker made his way carefully down the narrow stairs. The last thing he needed was to fall and injure himself before the next game. He shivered as the air grew even colder and wondered if the basement was even insulated. No wonder the pipes had frozen. His foot hit the floor and he glanced around the small room. Actually, room might have been an overstatement. He could touch every wall from where he stood, but thankfully that made it easy to find the water valve. It creaked and groaned under his grip, but he managed to switch it off. Now they just had to find a way to thaw the pipes without causing them to burst. Not being a plumber, he didn't trust himself to know the best way to thaw them. Thankfully, he knew a plumber who owed him a favor. He made his way carefully back up the steps and found Shelby with her hands tightly clasped and her eyes closed. Her lips moved slightly as if praying. He cleared his throat, not wanting to alarm her, but wanting to let her know he was there. Her eyes snapped open. "Did you find it?" "I did, and I got it turned off. However, I'm no expert at this. If we try to thaw them and do it wrong, we could still cause them to burst. I recommend we call a plumber." Her bottom lip folded under and sadness filled her eyes. Her hands twisted together, and her words tumbled out like an avalanche. "A plumber? But that will cost money. I don't have any money, and the landlord is on vacation until the end of the month. Plus, what if he can't come right away? We can't afford to lose the center, but I can't have kids here if there's no water." He crossed to her and placed his finger under her chin, lifting her eyes to his to get her attention. "Hey, I know a plumber who owes me a favor. Let me call him and see if he can come out. We'll figure out what to do from there." She nodded, but his heart still went out to her. She looked so stressed, like anything else might send her screaming for the hills, and he wished he had a way to shoulder her worry. "I'll be right back, but trust me, it will be okay." Tucker hoped he hadn't spoken too soon as he stepped away from her and dialed the number of his contact. It rang in his ear, and he clenched his jaw. Come on, Teddy. Pick up. I need you to pick up. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure Shelby was still out of hearing range. Perfect plumbing. This is Teddy. How can I help you? Tucker breathed a sigh of relief at the sound of Teddy's voice. Hey, Teddy. It's Tucker Jackson. You remember that favor you owe me? Tucker had run into Teddy at a fundraiser this past summer. The man had been desperate for tickets to the season opener for his son's birthday, and as Tucker had few friends at the time to invite, he had offered up his box seats in exchange for a favor in the future. Tucker Jackson! Of course, I remember. Bummer about the loss the other night, but you guys will pull it out, right? I sure hope so. Tucker hated being reminded of the loss, but he knew Teddy meant nothing by it. It was something all fans said at some point, as though they could commiserate with how hard the players trained, only to still lose. Anyway, I have a friend over at the community center. The cold weather froze their pipes, and we need to get them thawed so she can open today. You think you could squeeze in a little time to come check it out? For you, man, I'll make some time. Let me get dressed and grab my tools. I'll be there in under an hour. Thanks, Teddy. You're a lifesaver. Tucker punched the end call button and turned back to Shelby. Okay, he said he can be here in an hour. Thank you. She looked back toward the entrance. Do you think we can still open? I don't want to turn people away, but I'd hate to let them in if we aren't going to have water. I'm sure he'll be able to get the water running again. What else do we need to do to prepare for the kids arriving? Her brow furrowed as she thought. Salt. We need to lay salt on the sidewalk. Okay, that's good. Do you have any here? I think we have some in the supply shed. Let me get the key and we can go check. Tucker followed her back to the reception area and waited while she grabbed the key. He wondered when his view of her had shifted. When he'd first met her, he'd found her so stiff that he'd wondered if a rod had been jammed into her spine. She had looked as if she didn't know the meaning of the word relax, much less how to do it. But over the last 2 days, he had seen her sense of humor and how much she cared for these kids. Now when he saw her, he didn't see her as stiff and unapproachable. Instead, he saw a strong woman who would do anything for those she cared about. And he found it attractive and appealing. Okay, I've got it, Shelby said, dangling the key in front of her face. What? Nothing. Tucker couldn't tell her how he felt. Not yet, anyway. He needed to know if she felt anything for him first, and he should probably wait until his time here was finished. It would be way too uncomfortable to continue working with her if he shared his feelings and she didn't reciprocate them, and he still had to fulfill his hours. Let's go. Another car had pulled into the parking lot while they were inside, and disappointment flooded Tucker when he realized it was Kenzie. Shelby would probably send Kenzie with him to get the salt instead of going herself now. Hey, everything okay? Kenzie asked as she stepped out of her car. The pipes are frozen, so there's no water right now. But Tucker called a plumber to come check them out, Shelby returned. We were just heading to the shed to see if there's any salt. I'll go with him to get the salt. You should stay out here and let parents know when they arrive, Kenzie said. Tucker bit back his disappointment and shivered in his jacket. He'd rather go with Shelby, but right now he just wished they would get moving. Already the cold was seeping in through his jacket, and he needed to do something to warm up. He hoped Teddy arrived soon because he would have to leave for practice a little early with the icy roads, and he'd like to be here to discuss the price arrangement. Shelby glanced at her watch and blew out a breath, sending a white vapor cloud into the air. You're probably right, although I thought people would be arriving by now. I hope the snow isn't keeping them away. Shelby handed the key to Kenzie and then scanned the parking lot. Can you see if there's a shovel as well? Maybe if we shovel the parking lot, they will come? Tucker couldn't help the grin that sprang to his face at her allusion to the old Kevin Costner movie. There was that sense of humor again. Was that part of what was intriguing him now? Come on, Tucker. Let's see what we can find. Though she was not dressed for snow in her tight jeans and high-heeled boots, Kenzie led the way confidently across the parking lot. The supply shed appeared to be in decent shape on the outside, but Tucker wondered what they would find inside. He feared everything would be old and worn out like it was inside the center. Okay, let's see if there's salt and a shovel in here. Kenzie inserted the key into the lock on the door of the small shed and turned it. Tucker heard the distinctive click, and then Kenzie was pulling the door open. The shed was packed from one end to the other, and Tucker wondered how they found anything when they needed it. Ugh, he could at least keep it a little neater, Kenzie said as she scanned the contents. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling. Great, no light either. Well, I guess we'll just have to be super careful. Why don't you take that side and I'll take this one? Without waiting for him to agree, she moved to the left and began scouring the shed. Tucker shook his head as he moved to the right. Visions of him tripping on something or stepping wrong and twisting his ankle flashed through his head. It would not do to get injured here. Here. He grabbed the handle of the sole shovel he saw leaning against the wall. It wasn't even a snow shovel, which wasn't unusual as this area didn't receive snow that often, but it would make shoveling the snow a long and arduous process. There's only one, though, unless you want to use a broom. I'm not sure a broom will do much good, but I found the salt. It's too heavy for me to lift, so if you can grab the salt, I'll take the shovel. Tucker scanned the rest of the shed to see if there was anything else they could use. But while the shed was filled with all sorts of odds and ends, nothing looked as if it could move snow. He handed Kenzie the shovel, muscled the large bag of salt onto his shoulders, and followed her out of the shed.